Libya's prime minister rejects normalization with Israel following secret meeting of ministers. Let's start with this one right here, as we're going to go through a timeline here of topics that we like to do here each and every week with Dr. Woods when he's available, when I'm available. And this first segment, Dr. Woods, we usually do bullet points. What's our first one today?
Well, this is just a Gog Magog update.
Okay.
The famous prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39, which we think is yet future, where a conglomeration of nations invade Israel in the last days. And just kind of an update on that, one of those invaders is a nation called Put, which we believe is modern-day Libya. If folks get my book, The Middle East Meltdown, The Coming Islamic Invasion of Israel, they'll see the documentation for that. But it's interesting to me that in this age of the Abraham Accords and nations seeking normalization with Israel, now all of a sudden we learned that Libya was having secret meetings, and it came out that they can't enter into a normalization agreement with Israel. In fact, if they were to do so, they would violate their own 1957, Libyan law. And I find this very interesting. And even before I get to that, they talk here about we will never normalize with Israel as these secret agreements were brought to the surface, because they say, long live the Palestinian cause. What's the Palestinian cause? It's the land of Israel that we call the land of Israel without a Jewish presence in that land anymore. That's the Palestinian cause. And Libya is reaffirming that they will not normalize with Israel, and they are hostile to Israel. And surprise, surprise, surprise. That's exactly what Ezekiel 38 and 39 predicts when it predicts Libya would be one of the invaders of the land of Israel in the last days. Conversely, Sheba and Dedan, Saudi Arabia, they're constantly in the news today about how they're about to enter into a normalization agreement with Israel. A normalization agreement with Israel is basically an agreement where a Islamic nation guarantees Israel's right to exist in exchange for trade, travel, tourism, and technology. And because Sheba and Dedan, Saudi Arabia, are about ready to normalize with Israel, that explains Ezekiel 38, verse 13, why the Saudis would protest when this invasion from Iran, Turkey, and Russia takes place. Libya, by contrast, will be one of the invaders, and that could be a reason why, contrary to the Saudis, different than the Saudis, she is not entering into a normalization agreement with Israel. So it's just more evidence on how Saudi Arabia is now moving into prophetic orbit, exactly like Ezekiel predicted 2,600 years ago. And so is Libya. The two nations are going the opposite directions in terms of normalization. And that fits perfectly with the Ezekiel 38 and 39 scenario.
All right, let's go to the next one. Next headline. Jerusalem Post. Iran and Turkey look to new regional strategy. While Iran and Turkey may not always see things the same way, they increasingly share interests. Of course, this again is that Gog Magog Ezekiel 38-39 coalition coming together with Iran and Turkey strengthening their relationship.
Yeah, it's not just Iran and Turkey moving into posture against Israel. And by the way, that hasn't always been there.
That's right.
Turkey used to be an ally of Israel, as did Iran.
A lot of Israelis used to vacation in Turkey, didn't they?
Absolutely. And Iran was one of the first nations that recognized, the reborn modern state of Israel. So it's not just Turkey and Iran moving into posture against Israel like they are today. It's the two of them cooperating with each other. So it's nation A, nation B against nation C with the motive to invade nation C. And if that weren't prophetically significant enough, now those two invading nations are in cahoots. In fact, one of the last sentences in the article says that's Iran and Turkey, talk together more frequently than the U.S. does with either Iran or Turkey. So more than our government talks to Iran or more than our government talks to Turkey, these two nations are talking to each other. So the invading alliance is now fitting into prophetic orbit as well.
Absolutely. Dr. Andy Woods will be back with more. His website, andywoodsministries.org. Ours, worldviewtube.com. And when you get there, first at Gog Magog, that coalition of nations that will eventually come against Israel as described in Ezekiel 38:39. Let's move now to our second topic point that all fit together, and that is the kings of the East. The kings of the East. Dr. Woods?
Well, the kings of the East, according to the sixth trumpet judgment, Revelation 9, and the sixth bowl judgment, Revelation 16, will basically traverse the Euphrates. The Euphrates, is that demarcating point separating the Far East from the Middle East. But according to Bible prophecy, that river is going to be dried up. In fact, I've actually seen reports recently of how, it seems to be getting lower and lower in terms of, height of water, which I kind of find it's one of those things that makes you kind of scratch your head and say, that's interesting. But at any rate, prophecy indicates that this great conglomerate from the east will traverse the Euphrates River, which will be supernaturally dried up. It will then move into northern Israel for the final battle, known as the Battle of Armageddon. And as this giant army is moving, it will wipe out, 1/3 of the world's population. So the big question is, this 200 million strong army from the east, who is it? Well, the late Dr. John Walvoord, one of the great defenders of dispensational eschatology, the viewpoint that I represent, argued in his 1966 Revelation commentary that this is a reference, among other nations, to China. And so if all of this is true, everything we see in the news today about aggressive, bellicose China, it's just another sign of the time period that we're living in, because an aggressive China is setting the stage for this, end time prophecy that I'm trying to describe. So as you know, Brannon, I mean, you cover it every night. China's in the news all the time.
Yep.
I mean, our own administration is in bed with China. We had a Solwell who was having an affair with a Chinese spy. We had the balloon incident where they, took surveillance of our whole military and country. And the Biden administration didn't do anything about it until the surveillance was complete. You have China actually building police stations on U.S. soil to police its own citizens. We all the time hear about the potential imminent invasion of China into Taiwan. And now here's the latest headline from Newsweek.com. China warns U.S. has crossed the red line and warns of lethal consequences.
Yeah, show that, guys.
That word lethal is pretty interesting to me. That kind of sounds like what the Bible predicts, how they're going to wipe out, if I'm understanding all of this correctly, 1/3 of the world's population. And then if that weren't enough, here's another headline. This from ScienceAlert.com. U.S. to build robot army. Now, I don't know if that's the solution, but these people think it is. U.S. to build a robot army to counter China's growing power. I mean, why are all these headlines about China and her aggressiveness? Because this is one of the signs that would come into existence just before Jesus came back, according to Revelation 9 and Revelation 16. That's why all this is, very, very intriguing.
And your reference to reference to the return of Jesus, there would be the second coming, not the rapture.
That's correct. The rapture could happen in the next split second. All of these things have to happen prior to the second advent.
Yeah. Here's a headline. If you go over to worldviewreport.com, your daily aggregated news site, where we're constantly putting up new articles Here's one: China preparing for war. September 6th, brand new article at Gatestone Institute. China preparing for war. And of course, I think this is one way they bring down America. Why is America not listed in the end times? I think America has ceased to be a world superpower. We're losing militarily. We're losing demographically. We're not producing like we should. Another one: Russia, China, and North Korea to hold trilateral war games. Okay, this is a website. If it'll pop up here, it'll bring us to, there we go, the Libertarian Institute. Russia, China, and North Korea to hold trilateral war games. Of course, we just had a ICBM launched by North Korea. We know that they're really being controlled by North Korea. So again, this goes to that whole coalition of nations that are already going to take out, I think, America, which would, I think, prepare the way for them to move against Israel. Your thoughts, Dr. Woods?
Well, my thoughts are parallel with yours. I mean, Russia is rumbling and China is chomping, chomping at the bit. I don't have a specific prophecy in the Bible for North Korea, but I think I've got clear prophecies for Rosh or Russia and China that I just got finished trying to explain. So is it any big shock that the two would, start cooperating with each other as you're describing? Running joint, military exercises. You see, what's fascinating to me is not just the fact that these players are all in place, just like God said they would be at the end of the age, but they're all cooperating with each other. They're forming alliances with each other. And as you watch these alliances develop, you start to wonder, how close are we, to the fulfillment of the prophesied events?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move to the next phase. We talked about Gog Magog. We talk about the kings of the East rising, Israel, China. Let's move now to globalism. Here's an article. Biden says climate crisis is undeniable after the hurricane that just damaged here in America. So, Biden tells us that climate crisis is undeniable. So much for following the science, right, Dr. Woods?
Well, there's a quote I like to use from King and Schneider from 1991. And in that particular quote, they're two globalists. They say, we always needed a common enemy to fight so we could get the nations of the earth to surrender their sovereignty. And so they clearly say in this quote that to do that, we came up with the idea of global warming. Now, that was 1991. They can't use the language global warming anymore because the numbers, don't always go where they want them to go. They just developed this, broader, umbrella term called climate change. But in the next year, Al Gore, in his book, Earth in the Balance, clearly says we have to make the issue of the environment the, quote, controlling principle of all of civilization, close quote. It's just the difference between today and Hitler's days. He didn't have the technology, at his fingertips that we have in terms of altering the weather. And so I'm on board. I'm in concurrence with what you're talking about.
Let's go to this next one, then we'll go to break. America's top law schools are teaching students to abandon the Constitution. Well, of course they are, because this fits perfectly with globalism, which is the point we're on, globalism, right? Ignore constitutional American laws and sovereignty. Don't let the Constitution be the supreme law of the land, which we've been ignoring largely. It's now about international law, global law.
Yeah, the greatest straitjacket or handcuffs that's ever existed on globalists is the United States Constitution. Globalism and the United States Constitution cannot peacefully coexist. One of them has to give way. Now, as you know, Brannon, I'm an attorney. I went through law school in the early 1990s, and it was bad back then. They had adopted law schools, the case law method, which basically says it's the judge's opinion of the Constitution rather than the Constitution that is what matters. Well, according to this article, it's gotten way worse because you throw into the mix critical race theory, which demonizes the Constitution as a racist document. And so most people graduating from Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, Yale, etc., are graduating with no knowledge of the Constitution
Absolutely.
whatsoever.
Hold right there. We'll come back. We'll get to Mark of the Beast technology, our last point on today's update with Dr. Wood. Things are changing, and they are changing fast. Mark of the Beast technology is showing us that, but I want to skip right away to one of them right here, because this, again, shows us where we're going with Mark of the Beast technology, occultism, whatnot. Stunning proportion of Americans report interacting with dead relatives. I want to jump to this one, which is under occult revival. Then we're going to jump right back to Mark of the Beast technology. I want to go to this one first because it fits with what's happening, sadly, within America, Christianity. Carl Teichrib warned yesterday in our interview live from Burning Man. He said the trend there at Burning Man was how to interact with Jesus. What? At Burning Man? Yeah, through psychotropic drugs or psychedelic drugs to interact with Jesus. So obviously that's a false Christ, a false Messiah that Jesus himself warned about. But he said, watch out, that's going to come into evangelicalism or so-called Christianity. And I said, well, why wouldn't it? We've already got Christian yoga. Christian yoga is an altered state of consciousness, making the natural world dissolve, entering the spiritual realm, which is where you often meet a spirit or master guide, a demon. And oftentimes they encounter an entity claiming to be Jesus. That's what Helen Schuckman, who wrote the book A Course in Miracles, the Bible, the New Age, encountered an entity named Jesus and wrote the New Age occultic New Age Bible, A Course in Miracles. Well, obviously a demon posing as Jesus. You know, it's so tragic. You know, Richard Foster, who wrote the book, was it Celebration of Disciplines, talks about entering the silence, Lextia Divina, centering prayers, soaking prayers, and turning back as your soul leaves your body and seeing your body lying in the grass. He talks about how you can encounter Jesus and have a literal physical encounter with Jesus through occultism, renamed. So why would we be shocked that at Burning Man they're teaching people through psychedelics like Aldous Huxley and Timothy O'Leary promoted to encounter Jesus? And Carl said, watch this enter the so-called Christian realm. So this fits with your last point today before we jump back to Mark of the Beast. Occultic revival. Dr. Woods?
Well, also we could throw into the mix Steve Berger, whose book, I think it's Have Heart or something like that.
Yep.
I mean, basically, and this has been out since 2010, somewhere around there. I mean, this is somewhat dated, but, you know, in that particular book, he talks about how he lost a son, and I feel badly for anybody in that predicament, but how his son's name is Josiah, and how he and his wife talk to Josiah regularly, and how they show up in their church sanctuary and they could sense Josiah's presence. Well, that's a biblical practice that the Bible condemns from cover to cover, called necromancy. Folks, you can't talk to the dead. God says don't do it. In fact, it's impossible to do it because David in 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 22 and 23, regarding his son that just died, says, can I bring him back? Answer, no. He will not come to me, but I, presumably after death, will go to him. So you can't talk to the dead. Once you move into the death, you're into the eternal realm where things are fixed. So who are these people talking to? I mean, they're talking to demons masquerading as the dead, who knew the dead, who knew their personality and temperament and, you know, figures of speech and manner of speech and so forth, because demons don't die. So they knew the dead. So they're pretending to be that dead person. And these people that are contacting the dead, they're not talking to benevolent beings. They're talking to malevolent beings, because Satan masquerades himself as an angel of light, and they're opening up deception. And this deception is coming right into the evangelical church via Steve Berger and some of these other people that you mentioned earlier, Richard Foster, and so forth. So the wall that evangelicals theologically used to have to keep all of this insanity out of the church was breached a long time ago. And so I agree with Carl Teichrieb. Watch it become the new normal in the evangelical world.
Well, and that's exactly what Timothy O'Leary and Aldous Huxley said. They said that these drugs, psychotropic drugs, would open up people to new realities, getting them away from the idea of one God, one reality. The drugs were going to help them do that. And they said this is going to happen without you or me. So Timothy O'Leary and Aldous Huxley talking, this is going to happen one way or the other. And now, of course, we see today drugs, pharmaceutical drugs everywhere, pot stores everywhere. You know, it isn't interesting. Again, the word pharmakia comes out of the word witchcraft. And this is a way you can meet a spirit or master guide, is through altered states of consciousness, which you can either do, according to the New Age, through drugs or hypnosis. That's the New Agers saying that decades ago. You know, you can use drugs to make the natural world dissolve, enter the spiritual world, and encounter an entity. Drugs or hypnosis. Some of them didn't want to do the drugs. That's why the Maharishi came to America in the 60s to teach transcendental meditation, new name for an old practice, yoga. And now it's Christian yoga in the so-called church. Yeah, what a joke. All right, last one. Mark of the Beast technology. Let's look at this headline. Major League Baseball testing hands-free entry for fans utilizing facial authentication and artificial intelligence security. So Major League Baseball, America's pastime, is going to get people really used to the idea of Mark of the Beast technology.